Well, Beth, it looks like it's 7 p.m. And because it's 7 p.m., I think you and I have to actually go to work for the day. And it is an absolute pleasure to see you. Oh, I got to mute that. That's for sure. I had the YouTube going on in the background there, and I could just hear that pounding in my ears. How are you, Beth?
Good. How are you?
I am quite well. You know what? I need to actually switch the screens on my monitors because otherwise I'm going to be looking at the wrong screen the whole night and that's going to make me miserable. All right. So tomorrow is the day, Beth. We have some folks here that are looking to get some final tips before we head into test day. So let's see if we can't hook them up. So with that being said, folks, here's how this is going to work. First things first, I need to give a shout out to Ms. Menti from Carmel Christian High School, because her students have been blowing up my Instagram asking for a shout out, and that is no problem for me. So shout out to y'all there. Folks, tell us where you're from. Tell us it right in the chat. I can see that there are some questions in there and already, but let us know where you're from, where you're tuning in from. We are here to help for the next hour, maybe to an hour and 15 minutes. Just so you all know, Beth and I are missing our children's baseball games tonight to be here with you all. That's not a guilt trip here. We're not trying to pull on any heartstrings or anything like that. We're just letting you know we are here to help, even at the extent to where we missed a baseball game. We've got some California. What else do we got going on in here? Somebody wants to join on the Zoom. No, this is for Beth and for me. Sorry. All right. Good. Let's see. Where else are we coming from? I saw California. That's the farthest I've seen so far. Ohio, Florida, British Columbia. Nice.
Oh, cool.
We're going international today. Yeah, oh my gosh. Pennsylvania, all that kind of cool stuff. Alabama. Awesome. All right. Hey, someone wants us to talk about the synthesis essay. Luckily, we're going to actually talk about every part of the AP Lang exam here tonight, folks. We are going to cover from multiple choice all the way through argument, and we'll try to give you the best tips that we possibly can. And oh man, Dr. Mazzone. Oh my gosh. So that's the New Jersey. I actually know Sarah, and she is so totally awesome. Dr. Mazzone is one of my favorite people. I don't, you know what? It might be Mazzoni, but I've always only ever called her Sarah, so I don't know for sure. Audrey's coming from Massachusetts. Hey, Audrey, I hope you're quite well. Right down the street. All that kind of cool stuff. So folks, listen up. As you are in here, please put questions and comments and fashion tips in the chat. Beth and I will try to monitor that as best we can. Couple things though, okay, to set the ground rules. We are going to cover the test from multiple choice, then we'll do synthesis, then we'll do rhetorical analysis, then we'll do argument. But if there are people putting stuff in the chat that's inappropriate, like no warnings, I'm just clicking kick out. Like that's what it comes down to, because there's really no reason to be like that. We're trying to help folks out. Beth and I will help try to monitor the chat as best we can, but there's two people and there's a lot of people putting stuff in. So sometimes you will have to put your question in more than once. Like I see this personal pronoun question right here. And so someone just put a personal pronoun question in the chat. One of the things that Beth and I are going to do is we're going to also toss in some links to videos that we have that address some of these questions that we might not be able to get into tonight. Like this one, I'm going to put personal pronouns. Personal pronouns. I'm going to type that in the chat right now. I'm going to put a link right there. That is a video where my friend Crystal Liberty teaches you about using those personal pronouns in your argument essay. So folks, be prepared for stuff like that here today. Now, Beth, I've been talking way too much. Why don't you tell us who you are and where you're from? Not like anybody doesn't know. While you're doing that, I'm going to put the link to your channel in the chat. Folks, the easiest and best way that you could support us here tonight, as we are missing our children's sports games, is to just subscribe to our channel. That would be totally awesome. And I'll put Beth's link right in there, but it's also in the description right down below. Also, once we are done, there is an after party at Marco Learning's channel, so you can go hang out live with Marco Learning. But Beth, tell us where you're from, tell us what you do, then we'll get this party started.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Beth Hall. I go by Coach Hall on social media because I used to be a soccer coach. And so I have a YouTube channel, Coach Hall Writes, and also a TikTok, same handle. So if you are looking for more information later tonight, feel free to head on over to TikTok, and I will be going live later tonight after my kiddos go to bed Just want to give a couple of shout outs here. I haven't seen them in the chat yet, but I think because it's going so quickly, but I think Miss Matthews' class, I think that was one of the ones that's having like a live watch party tonight. So yeah, I know, I was really
amazing.
So I wanted to give them a shout out as well. And then it looks like we got shout outs for Mrs. Blackbill and Dr. Wilborn, lots of Dr. Wilborn, Miss Gordon, and a few others as well. So thank you all for shouting out your teachers in the chat. We know how
Mrs. Pinson here from Crescent High School too.
Awesome. Yeah, so there's lots. So yeah, we're glad to have you all. Thank you all for taking time out of your evening in order to study with us. We hope to answer as many questions as we can. Please be patient with us as we go through this because as you can see, the chat is moving super quickly, but we're really excited to help y'all out tonight. That's
right. Sometimes I'm like, I'm just going to press hide chat and I'm just going to, you and I could just talk, but I'm just playing. We want to actually help out. Good. Mrs. Rojas and Dr. Wilborn, all of y'all, Mrs. Keck, shout out to all y'all. Y'all are just fabulous and awesome and amazing and all those cool things. And Mrs. Smith and Mr.
Yes, Miss Matthews' class is here. It says pizza party and watching happily. I'm jealous.
I wish I were doing that too. Anyway, so Coach, tell us where you're from. Tell us what you do once again, and then we will start us off.
Okay, awesome.
But did you already say that, by the way? Did you already say that you're from Arkansas?
I don't think I said I'm from Arkansas, but
I gotcha.
The accent kind of creeps in. So I'm from Arkansas.
All right. So Beth, you've been an AP reader?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you're coming back this year, right?
Yes, I'm excited.
Awesome. So Beth and I have been AP readers, so you can ask us questions about essays and whatnot, and we will try to get them as best we can. Someone says time management tips, please. Well, we could start there, but let's talk about multiple choice first. So Beth, tell us about the qualms that your kids have with multiple choice. I'll drop a multiple choice video in while you're talking, and then I can address multiple choice too. What are the qualms that you have? What are some ways that you can help kids out? And try to think about some time management stuff in there too as you're talking.
Okay, great. So for the multiple choice, I'm assuming most people know this, but just in case, you have 1 hour to answer 45 questions. And it's important to know the layout. So the first 2 passages are going to be reading, kind of like reading comprehension, nonfiction passages. These are longer. There are more questions. And so these can be a little bit more time consuming. My students tell me these are the hard ones for the most part, and I tend to agree with them. So these are questions kind of like if you've taken the SAT reading, they're kind of similar where they want to know the function of a paragraph or the purpose of the passage and things like that. So things that you're probably pretty used to. They might ask you about the exigence of the passage. So in case you've never heard that word before, the exigence is kind of like the catalyst. It's like what prompted them to write or speak. And then the last 3 passages, those are my favorite ones because those are the writing MCQ. And it's still multiple choice, even though they say writing, but it's kind of like editing. So these are all going to say something to the effect of this is a draft at the top, and they're much shorter passages, and they have fewer questions, probably about 5 to 8 questions. And so for these, you're going to be asked things like how to write, like, which option is the best opening sentence if they want it to be engaging, or should you add a sentence here? Should you delete a sentence? Yes or no? Transition words, things like that. So one thing that I have told my students is for those that are struggling with pacing, because some of my students, they get 60 minutes and they're right at that. As soon as they call time, they're bubbling in that last answer right before. So for those students, if they're really strong at writing, they're going to try, because they've practiced this, they're going to try the writing questions first to kind of play to their strengths, because each question is worth 1 point, no matter how hard it is or how easy it is, it's just worth 1 point. So that's probably one of my best tips is play to your strengths, kind of know which questions you're better at and lean into those, but also don't take forever on a question that is hard, because it's literally just worth 1 point. So we want to bubble in an answer for everything, even if it's just a guess. And we also want to use process of elimination, because usually you can toss out 2, maybe 3 of the answer choices and narrow it down to a couple.
All right. Whew.
I know that was a lot.
I know there's tons here. Now, a couple questions that are showing up here. How can I identify the answer quickly? I struggle whenever I narrow it down to 2 answers. I'll deal with that in just a moment. But I did put a link in the chat to a multiple choice tips video for that. And so I will address that. Another one that I saw was, can I do the reading? How do I do the reading of multiple choice quickly and efficiently? So I'm going to try to address those two questions here as we think about multiple choice. Now, first of all, listen, folks, the best way to learn how to do multiple choice better is to become a more consistent reader because it helps build your comprehension. But we only have less than 24 hours till testing, so that's not going to help us too much right now. So tip number one is this. For those of you that are trying to really read effectively to answer multiple choice questions, especially in the first two reading passages, which are more like rhetorical analysis reading passages where you have to comprehend this kind of harder reading and talk about rhetorical elements, there are a couple of things that you could do. The first thing that you could do is as you read, if you notice any major shifts, you want to just draw a line. Draw a line where the major shift happens. And the reason why is because when you answer multiple choice questions, they're typically focused on points where an author is very clearly trying to shift to something or contrast something. So if you just draw a line, you're good to go. So if you notice that the author makes a claim and then shifts to providing an example, you just draw a line between the claim and the example. But what normally happens is you get into the multiple choice questions and it will say, oh, in line such and such, the author is attempting to, and answer B is going to say exemplify a prior claim. And you'll know that that's exactly the answer because you're like, oh my word, I noticed that shift. So most multiple choice questions, when they're line based, are based on lines where you see a significant shift or contrast happening. So if you're reading before even getting to the multiple choice questions and you're just marking where you see major shifts, you're going to be in really good shape. Okay, so that's the first way that you can read more effectively. The next way that you can read more effectively is that you need to think about having elements of the rhetorical situation in mind. Someone asked a question in the chat that said, how do I read for exigence more effectively? Well, as you read, say to yourself, why would this person write this piece in the first place? Where is that even implied here? And if you can do that, you're really thinking about exigence. And then if you want to think about audience, because sometimes you get a question that says the audience for the piece is most likely. As you read in the back of your mind, just kind of have this question, kind of permeating here that says, what magazine would I see this in? Or what type of publication would I actually see this in? And the reason why is because that will give you the audience, right? If you think that this might show up in a National Geographic, well, good. What kind of people do you think read National Geographic? If you think this might show up at Sports Illustrated, what type of people read Sports Illustrated? And that can help you with a lot of things like that. So having the rhetorical situation in the back of your mind is kind of nice. One of the things that I tell my students to do and is this, that when you read and you kind of break your passage into sections, think to yourself, what does this particular passage tell me about more that I can know about the speaker, the audience, or the message? Or what emotions would the audience be feeling here? Those kind of 4 questions can also really help if you can get a section of text. So just kind of having that in the back of your mind. Now, when it comes to answering questions, when you have your lead distractor, somebody put a question in here that was like, well, I can narrow it down to 2. And I'd like to know, how can I differentiate quickly between the right and the wrong answer? I've got multiple tips here for you, but I'm going to break them into 2 sections. The first one is when you get a question, you need to know if the overall tone of the passage, that's the speaker's attitude towards whatever he or she is talking about. If the overall tone of the passage is positive, when you get to this particular set of answers, you should expect the correct answers to be positive in nature. If you notice that the tone is negative, you would expect the answers to be more negative in nature. So you can pretty much cross out answers based on the tone of the passage. Now you might be like, yeah, but the tone isn't positive or negative. It's more like didactic or kind of scholarly. Well, then good. If an answer doesn't sound scholarly, it's probably not the right answer. So correct answers will typically match the tone of the piece. So that's a good thing to go in with. Another set of tips for you is this. If you know the common qualities of what lead distractors entail, you can actually think about that when you narrow it down to 2. So there are 3 common qualities of lead distractors. Now, this is just anecdotal evidence, but I've noticed this in patterns over years of teaching this course. And the first one is that the answer is half right and half wrong. And a lot of times kids will entertain that answer because they're not confident in the half wrong part. So they're like, I know that that's right, but did I misread and miss this part of the half wrong? When they know that the next answer is actually entirely right. So if it's half wrong, it's all wrong. So you got to think about that. Another type of lead distractor is the answer is correct, but not for the particular question that you're looking at. So you might be like, I've read both of these responses. I can point to where that shows up in the text. Well, good for you, but only one of them actually answers that particular question. So they might both be true in relation to the text, but not to that question. And the last one is you want to make sure that you answer specific answers. So if you feel like you've narrowed it down to two and one is significantly more general, it's most likely the wrong answer. So that's what I have for tips for multiple choice in terms of getting through it efficiently and effectively on test day, knowing that I can't say, hey, you've got 3 months till test day, go read some more. Did I miss anything for multiple choice there?
No, I think you gave some really good tips. I think the key thing is making sure that students look at the answer choice, and if it's partially wrong, it's not your right answer. I think that's one of the biggest things that confuses people. Also, just a friendly reminder to those in the chat, if you do not like the class and you do not want to be here, you are welcome to leave the live because your comments are not needed. We're looking for serious content and serious questions, please.
Yeah, Beth, if you have a name, just text it over to me and I can go find that and take care of that. Okay. So yeah, honestly, folks, like we're giving up our time for this. Please, let's be productive, as productive as we can. Okay. And so anyway, with that being said, I'm trying to think if there's anything else multiple choice that's super quick that we can give us tips for tomorrow. Oh, one other tip for multiple choice that can really help on the writing questions is this. And that is know when to use a semicolon, dashes, and a colon. Now, you will not be asked a question about those particular pieces of punctuation. However, if you know the difference between using a colon and a semicolon, or when to offset with dashes, you will be asked questions where, rhetorically speaking, one of those is more appropriate. And because of that, that will actually, knowing the difference will help you narrow down answers super quickly. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to send it back to Beth. Anything else that showed up in the chat while I was rambling that I could possibly deal with?
I think one thing for students to remember too is that, let's say the first passage is really hard. Like, let's say you open up your exam booklet tomorrow, because you're going to have one booklet that has your passages and you'll have an answer sheet. And you need a number 2 pencil for this, by the way, not a mechanical pencil. Let's say the first passage is really challenging. Please don't get this defeatist mindset. Like, please don't assume that all the passages are going to be really hard, because sometimes the first passage really is the hardest. So we want to make sure that we're staying in a positive mindset. We don't want to be like, oh, I'm going to fail the whole thing now. It could just be really hard. And sometimes the hard passages, like the ones that are genuinely difficult to read, actually have somewhat easy questions. So don't give up, because there are probably about maybe 60% of the questions that you can answer if you go back to the passage. Like, please go back to the passage to find your answers. For a lot of these, they're in the text. So we want to go back and not just do it by memory, because I feel like sometimes our memory lets us down a little bit. Yeah.
One other thing about multiple choice too that I forgot to mention, as we think about going through multiple choice efficiently, when you have a question that says except in it, so you're not going to have Roman numeral questions anymore. And if you're like, what's a Roman numeral question? Well, then don't worry about it. But if you get an except question, don't waste your time. If you can't answer that within 45 seconds, just skip it. There'll probably be about 4 on your whole test. Go back when you're done. That's important, because except questions can be real time wasters, because you go back and put in every single answer and you search all over the place for it. Another tip that I have also is really focus on the question stem, because if there are line numbers that are given in the question stem, you want to read the 3 lines before it and about 3 lines after, and you'll most likely find an implied answer within that section of text. But if the question stem says, in the context of the passage, line 27, blah, 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 you would then need to know that you need to have a holistic understanding of the passage, not just that microcosm there. Okay. So you really want to look for the language that says, like, in the context of the passage. If it just says in line numbers, all right, I need to have 3 lines before, 3 lines after, and I could probably narrow down the answer in there. But if it says in the context of blank, if it says in the context of paragraph 1, the first line of paragraph 2, blah, blah, blahs, you really need to be thinking about how does paragraph 2 relate to paragraph 1 not just that first sentence of paragraph 2. Okay. Good. All right. I think, okay, someone asks this because we're going to shift into essay talk now. Someone asked, and we'll just deal with this one right away because I've seen it show up a couple times. Is there an order that we recommend for the essays? Beth, you take it away, and then I'll throw down my answer.
Okay, so here's the thing. I think for the most part, many students start with synthesis because it's the first one that shows up, but also it's the most time consuming because you have 6 to 8 sources to read. And honestly, they've been using 6 a lot lately, and a couple of them might be what we call a visual text. So those don't really take a whole lot of time to read. You just have to interpret. But I think a lot of students benefit from doing synthesis first because I feel like you almost feel relieved when it's done. So that's what a lot of my students do. I tell them to play to their strengths. So many of my students actually take the test in order because they prefer rhetorical analysis. For many of my students, argument is their least favorite. Now, the ones who like argument better, they're going to take their test tomorrow where they're going to do synthesis, argument, and then rhetorical. And I have one student who I think is going to do rhetorical because that's her best, and then synthesis, and then argument. You can take them in any order. It's up to you. I think the thing that I would advise, especially if you feel like there's one essay that's definitely your weakest, or if you see one prompt tomorrow that you're just like, I'm really struggling with this, I would personally put it last. And the reason why I say that is because you can get a score of a 120 or even a 130 with a somewhat rushed essay. But if you're the type of student who needs a little bit more time and you can get like 5 or even all 6 points, I would prioritize that on test day. That's just my opinion, but I would put the essay that you feel least confident in last, simply because you could still write enough to earn points, but we don't want you to run out of time on an essay that you had brilliant ideas for. That's just my thoughts on the matter. But I told my students last week, they came up with a game plan, and they basically all came up with individual plans for themselves as far as like, this is where my strengths lie. But most of my students do synthesis first just because the amount of work that goes into it. They just want to get it over with.
All right. So I was too busy typing away to I had one ear listening, Beth, so you'll have to forgive me, right? But I am going to address just a comment about multiple choice again in terms of like what order to do multiple choice, because I think it kind of ties into this as well. And I'll echo some of your same sentiments, but we'll make it quick because that was really thorough. For multiple choice, someone was asking, hey, if I think the writing multiple choice is easier, can I start with that? And the answer is absolutely yes. The problem that I have, though, is that for me, I would mismark my sheet. I would totally be that person that screws up with the bubble sheet. And I start at question, let's say 24, because that's when the writing questions start. And I start marking that on question 1. And then I get to question 24 and I'm like, oh, crud, I should have started at question 24. So as long as you are ready to mark your sheet accordingly, then you can start at whatever questions that you want. Now, I don't know how the online version of the test will work in terms of flipping back and forth, so I can't answer to that. But if you're taking the paper copy, you can do whatever you would like, okay? Somebody also asked us to show examples of what commentary looks like for synthesis essays. Beth and I have 8 million videos about that. So I'll put a commentary video in the chat in a little bit when we're talking about that. But folks, we can't pull up tons of examples and whatnot tonight because we're trying to answer as many questions as we can for this. Now, in terms of taking care of your essays, I always tell kids, you need to know yourself. For me, I like to get the quick stuff out of the way first. I can write a rhetorical analysis essay that's darn good in 20 minutes, hands down, guaranteed. Most of my students can too. So most of my students are going to start with the rhetorical analysis essay so they can see how much extra time that they have for the other 2 essays. And then, they'll most likely do synthesis next and then argument, because that's typically the one that my kids struggle with the most. However, if you're the type of person who's like, no, I love getting the hard stuff out of the way, that's a great thing. I have a student who just took the AP Lit exam, and his easiest essay is the question 3 essay. So he actually left the easy essay till the end because he knew that he was going to be running out of time. He had 15 minutes left to write his question 3, and he did it. And I can guarantee you that he did it very, very well. And it's because he just knows what to do. He's like, he reads so much and he knows how to write. So There it is. But let's actually get into synthesis, Beth. Let's talk about what we can do for synthesis. I'm getting a lot of, hey, is it okay to have 2 evidences? Is it okay to have a thesis and 2 body paragraphs with no conclusion? All of these kind of classic questions that we have. So we can answer that while we do this. But let's talk about synthesis, Beth. What are some things that, let's talk about the synthesis prompt first. What are good things to do with the prompt? Then we'll move to thesis and then body paragraphs and whatnot.
Okay, great. So for synthesis, remember that it's kind of like a mini research paper. So you have to assert a position on the topic and you have to use the sources to support your position. So they're going to give you a context paragraph is what I call it. They basically tell you the different perspectives on the issue. So lately they've been pulling stuff from the topic of education. Last year was STEM, the year before was cursive. We don't know what you'll get tomorrow. It could be something related to education or just everyday life, or it could be something you've never heard of or really thought about before, and that's okay. They will define terms that they believe will be unfamiliar to you. So don't worry about that. So you want to basically kind of think about, okay, what do I know about this issue off the top of my head and what thoughts do I have on it? Because sometimes it can really help to think about that first. But if you're like, I don't know, I've never thought about it, then it's okay to basically just start jumping into the sources. You just got to make sure that you know what the prompt is. So I encourage my students to underline the topic. It's going to say something about develop a position on, and then it might say the role of something or the value of something. So for those, they're basically asking you, like, to what extent is this topic beneficial? They're not necessarily asking if it's good or bad per se, but they're asking you to think about, like, how important or beneficial is this? Now, it's possible, I suppose, that they might ask about factors because they did that back in 2019. So factors are basically like things to consider. So things like location or size, or maybe the environmental impact or health impact, things like that. So you really want to make sure that you understand the question being asked. It's going to be written as a statement, but I think it helps to turn it into a question, because that way, hey, I'm actually answering the prompt. There's this old kind of corny joke that AP stands for answer the prompt. So we got to make sure we know what we're being asked to write about, because you're going to be probably a little stressed tomorrow. And sometimes it's easy to think you know what the prompt is, but you got to slow down and actually read and say, okay, this is what I'm being asked to write about. So that would be the first thing.
All right. Now, please note, folks, I see you all in the comments, and there's a lot of stuff coming in from RA and argument. Right now, we're in the synthesis section, so we're trying to focus on synthesis stuff. So I ask you to just keep your RA and argument questions out for now, because then when it's time for RA and argument, I can be like, okay, we're looking for those particular questions. Now, Beth, a couple of things just came up in the chat. One of them was how many sources do you have to actually quote in your paper in order to get full marks? It's right in the prompt. So we're talking about the prompt right now. Give me the answer, please, here, Beth.
You need to cite 3 sources. You can do more, but if you do fewer than, if you do 2 or 1 or none at all, it's going to drastically impact your score. So before you move on to your next essay, you need to make sure you've cited 3 sources. I tell my students to plan in advance. They need to figure out what their thesis is and what their main ideas are. And as part of that, I tell them to just jot a little quick note to themselves to know which sources they intend to use for each of their main ideas, because you don't want to accidentally forget a source because you're rushing. So it's really important that you have 3 sources, and it really helps if you cite them as what we call a parenthetical citation. That means that you're putting the name of the source in parentheses at the end of your sentence.
Okay, so someone just said, what about general questions for all essays? Folks, if you pay attention to our live stream, you will get most of the tips answered for most of your essays, okay? So I wanted to just point out also that when it comes to the prompt, turning the prompt into a question is something that's really nice. If the prompt says, argue your position on what factors need to be considered when blah, 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 then you just say, okay, what factors need to be considered? As long as your thesis answers that, we're in really good shape. But one of the questions that came up here, in relation to the prompt was, what if I have a prompt that's full of words that I don't know? And the truth is that the College Board will always provide you with context clues or actually define the words that you don't know. So there was a locavore prompt in 2011, and it talked about how locavorism, and then it said locavorism, and then it said people eating, or buying only locally produced foods, and then it went into everything else. So you don't want to miss that. Eminent domain was the same way. There was an eminent domain prompt. It was ridiculously boring. Many kids don't know about eminent domain. and it said eminent domain, which is blank, and then it gave the rest of the context here. So because of that, you really got a good chance of knowing what's going on, because they're going to define it for you in the prompt. But all right, Beth. So now we're seeing a lot of questions in the chat here that are like, well, do I have to have 2 sources per paragraph? Do I have to have a counter argument in my synthesis? Do I have to? These are the classic questions. So let's actually start talking about what this looks like. I saw questions about how to produce commentary. I'm going to put a commentary video in just a moment. Beth, once again, as always, if there are rude comments coming in, I have no problem just removing people. That's very easy for me to do. So text that over. Okay. Oh, you're on mute, Beth. I couldn't hear you.
All right, sounds good. Let's start with this counter argument question, because I know students keep asking this. So do you need one? The answer is no, you don't actually need one. You might want to include one to help the quality of your argument, but it's not required. It's something that can lead to a more sophisticated argument. But the question then becomes, okay, let's say I want to include a counter argument. Where do I put it? Some students like to include it as part of their body paragraphs, like their existing body paragraphs. They just kind of weave it in. And I think that's totally fine, especially if it fits what you're trying to say. Some students like to do it as a separate paragraph. And in that case, I see a lot of students doing it as a third body paragraph, mostly because if they run out of time, they can omit that, and then they still have 2 other body paragraphs that have proven their point. So you don't need one. You can include one, but please don't think it's automatically going to earn you the sophistication point, because it's not a guarantee. It has to be nuanced and well done. Sophistication is something that you have to be consistent with throughout your essay. It's not like one sentence can just make your whole essay a sophisticated essay. You can also do a counter argument thesis.
Sorry for interrupting, Beth. Actually, no, I'm not sorry, but I am going to ask that you forgive me. Just because you brought up sophistication, I know that things are going to blow up in just a second because of that. I'm going to just drop a sophistication video right in the chat right now too, for those of you that that are looking for some sophistication tips that we can't cover as in depth here. Beth, if you have any, drop those in too. Anyway, super sorry. Back to you with the counter argument, and then I'll jump in.
Oh, no, you're good. Basically, with the counter argument thesis, sometimes we'll be asked, okay, if I include a counter argument thesis, which is kind of like when you say although, and then you address the other side, or while, and you address the other side. You can do that, but you don't actually have to address the counter argument in your paper. These papers are viewed as a rough draft. And I think that's important to remember for all of the essays, is that there are going to be mistakes. There's going to be spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, things like that. And that's totally okay. Readers are told to read supportively. So we want to be awarding you points. And so that's why we tell you, counter argument's not required. Do what is best to further your argument. So you want to be as convincing as possible.
All right. Yeah, I actually encourage my students to just recognize that the counter argument is not the be all and end all, and they can put it wherever they want. I typically tell them to follow their thesis if they want to have a counter argument and develop one for that. I am going to also put a video with examples for how to integrate textual evidence. Beth has those on her channel as well. And the sophistication point is not guaranteed if you do a counter argument, but I know that you actually said that. And someone asked, is it wise to use all the synthesis sources? No, because that's a lot of reading that you're going to do. That's going to take a lot of time away from your writing. I tell my students that they have to do 4. They have to use 4 separate sources, minimum of 3, but I make my kids really think about using 4. One of them is the visual though, so they have to make sure they interpret that well. So that's just something right there that I typically preach to my students, but 3 is the minimum. And I also tell my kids, you really should have 2 quotes per paragraph. That doesn't mean 2 different sources, but you should try to get 2 separate quotes in the paragraph. And like I said, I just posted a video about how to do that and do that well. Someone asked if you could paraphrase or if you have to actually quote. No, you could summarize, paraphrase, or quote. But whenever you do that, you have to just cite the source as source A, source B, source C. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so that's that. Now, someone was asking about should you, if you're writing a counter argument, cite the source with a biased opinion? And the answer is no. You want to, if you're dealing with a counter argument, someone that would argue the opposite of you, it doesn't matter if the source is biased or not. If the language in the source is going against what you are actually arguing, then don't be like, oh, I can't use that now because the source doesn't have an easily recognizable bias. No, that's not a problem at all. In fact, I was thinking about the space exploration prompt from like 2009, and there's a chart that has a pie chart of how much per every federal dollar that's taxed goes to space exploration, and it's less than 6 cents. And that's not necessarily biased per se. It's just a federal chart of a scaled tax representation. But the thing is that when you talk about NASA's funding at less than 6 cents to the dollar, that doesn't sound like very much. But when you think about the billions and trillions of dollars of tax money that the government receives, that less than 6 cents becomes $517 billion in no time. And so because of that, that's not a biased source. But if I want to argue the idea that although it might seem like NASA doesn't get a lot of money, they really get a ton, then it's not a biased source, but I can still really bring in that counter argument if I want to. Now, someone asks, how do you advise someone plan out the essay before starting, and how much time should we spend on this? Beth, how much time do you tell your kids to plan with?
So to clarify, you're going to be given a 15-minute reading period. And so the proctor is going to tell you your reading period has begun, and then they time you for 15 minutes, and then they say it's ended, and they advise you to move on to your essays. You don't have to technically move on when they tell you to. So if you're done reading in, let's say, 10 minutes, you can start writing your essay. So I think it's important to keep track of your own time. I've even had students write their own like start and stop times on like the corner of one of their pages or something, so that they can keep track, because the proctor is only going to tell you at certain intervals. There should also be a clock in your room, by the way. A lot of students will bring a watch. You just can't bring a smartwatch. It can't be something that sends or receives messages. But sometimes the clock is hard to see in these testing rooms. So it might help if you have your own watch, by the way. But I tell my students, mostly because my students tend to like extra time for rhetorical analysis, I tell them to try to read the synthesis sources in about 10 minutes and save about 5 for rhetorical. But that's just because most of my students tend to take longer with rhetorical. So if that advice doesn't fit your individual strengths, then you want to play to your strengths as well.
All right. Now I'm seeing a lot of sophistication point questions here. I did put a video in the chat a little while back about sophistication point kind of stuff. That's actually the most teachable and learnable way to get it in all of the AP English classes. So you should check that out. Folks, the sophistication point is something that about 10% of test takers actually earn, and it almost never has like large implications on your exam score. Of like most kids that get the sophistication point are getting a 5. And if you're the type of person that's thinking about sophistication point right now, but you're not consistently writing 1 4 zeros in class already, which would be your thesis point and a 4 in evidence and commentary, you really want to focus on that. You don't want to focus on trying to do extra bells and whistles when we really want to get our most points. Because if you get a 5 out of 6 points on each one of your essays, you are putting yourself in position to still get a 5. You do not have to earn the sophistication point on any single one of the essays in order to still get a 5 on your exam. So I want to point that out. Now, the next question here, though, this is one that I'm seeing a ton, is, Beth, how many body paragraphs do I need a conclusion? Answer that for me, Beth.
Okay, so you can have 2 body paragraphs. If you want to, you can have 3. I tell my students quality over quantity, because I've read plenty of essays that have very well-developed body paragraphs.
Oh, Beth, I'm going to put you on pause here for just a minute. I'm looking in the comments here. If I'm getting comments that aren't even remotely serious, I'm just removing the person. So not even like the timeout, nothing like that. It's just removed because we want to really help people that really are looking for some help here. So, all right, Beth, sorry, back to you. Pardon that interruption.
Yeah, no problem. So basically you can write 2 body paragraphs. I would recommend really developing those body paragraphs because we want to make sure there's plenty of commentary. And as far as the conclusion goes, it's not required. These essays are viewed as a rough draft. So if you don't have time for a conclusion, then it's okay to end with a body paragraph, because the conclusion in some cases, if done very, very well, can elevate your score. Yes. But for most students, that's honestly not the case. And a lot of times what we see for a conclusion is just something to the effect of, and these are the reasons why, or it's just like basically their thesis all over again. And in my opinion, those are not necessarily the best use of people's time. So I see this question quite a lot. Kendall, I'm going to answer your question because you've asked it a few times. If you only have 30 seconds to write a conclusion, I don't know that if I only had 30 seconds to write a conclusion, I don't know that I would write one. I would probably just make sure that, my essay ended as smoothly as I could. But if you're the type of person who can write a conclusion where you are able to situate the issue in a broader context, or maybe do like a meaningful call to action, then yeah, go for it. But for most students, it's important not to stress about the conclusion. You need a good thesis and you need good body paragraphs, but the conclusion is really not very important in the grand scheme of things as far as scoring.
Okay. Right. And so, folks, the thing is, though, is that one of the things that I always ask my students to kind of consider, too, is this. I don't want you to think about what is the least I have to do to earn the most amount of points. The expectation is that you write a solid essay. Mm-hmm. Write a good essay. Have a very clear thesis. Have topic sentences that have evidence, and provide commentary. Now, Beth, I'm getting a lot of commentary questions here. Okay. And before I answer that, yes, conclusions help elevate the quality of your essay, but not having a conclusion does not mean that your essay will not still score well if you've got good evidence and commentary in a thesis, because a conclusion does not contribute to evidence and commentary. Okay. It can help contribute to the overall effectiveness of your paper as we read it. But if I've got evidence and commentary, that's what I'm scoring in row B. All right. Now, when it comes to commentary, Beth, people are asking, like, what's our best advice for commentary here? And I'm pretty sure that you and I have the same best advice. So, folks, when it comes to commentary, and it comes to commentary in relation to argument and synthesis, Beth's going to take it away first. I'll take it away second. And I'm going to drop the link to that video again about commentary as well. So, Beth, take it away.
Okay, so the simplest way to extend or improve your commentary is to use the word because remember, commentary is the why. You're trying to explain the significance of your evidence. So ask yourself, why is the quote that I just put in my essay, why is it important? And use the word because. And I tell my students to keep asking themselves why, how, or so what, because a lot of times what we see is what we call limited commentary. And that just means that the student does attempt commentary, but it's a little bit superficial. We want you to dig deeper. And so if you keep asking yourself why and writing because, or in order to, or maybe since, then it's going to extend your commentary. So you really want to think about, why does this quote that I've included matter? Why does it matter to society as a whole? That kind of thing. But if you're stuck on commentary, or if you're just having to write a really quick essay for whatever reason tomorrow, make sure that you include the word because. And then as like a secondary tip, there are verbs that you can use. Most students say shows, and that's okay, but there are ones that are better. So instead of shows, you could say things like showcases, illustrates, highlights, emphasizes,
contrast, challenges, refutes.
Yeah, there's all kinds of verbs that you can use instead of shows. So try to vary up your word choice a little bit as well as you're writing. But the because tip and the verbs that we just said, those can apply to pretty much all the FRQs in different ways.
All right. Now, another question here is, what information should be included in an introduction? Folks, you have to realize this is a timed essay. And if we look at maximizing our time for the points that we can earn on the rubric, we've got the thesis point, the evidence and commentary point, and the sophistication point. In terms of writing an introduction, I tell my students all the time, your first paragraph should just be your thesis. That's it. No reason to sit there and say, how am I going to sit there and web my reader? And where do I provide my background? And then where do I toss my partition so I can put my thesis on here? None of that intro stuff. Your thesis, that single sentence, is your intro. That will save you a lot of time. It'll save you a lot of that creative moment so that you can actually then execute in your body paragraphs. Somebody asked about structuring body paragraphs. Listen, folks, you can structure your body paragraphs however you want. Look, you have teachers that have been working with you all year that have been really investing skills into you. Beth and I are here to just offer tips so that you can pick and choose what you would like to do, but have confidence. Your teachers have been really helping you out all year and trying to tell you, here's a good way to write, because we are looking for good writing. Now, I will tell you that if you're looking for, hey, can you just lay out a paragraph for me? Yes. Topic sentence, evidence, commentary. And somebody asked about developing commentary besides because, and we can address that in a minute. But topic sentence, evidence, commentary. Now, some people ask, can I have 2 pieces of evidence in a paragraph? Yes. If you want to do topic sentence, evidence, commentary, do that. If you want to do topic sentence, evidence, commentary, do that. That's not a problem. Okay. I actually have a student who would put his commentary before his evidence every time, and they were inductive paragraphs. Not a problem. Okay. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. I also have people in here asking about qualifying things in the chat. Folks, if you are asking a question about qualifying, that means that you're not confident in qualifying, and we do not have enough time to practice that for tomorrow, which is test day. So I would encourage you to leave the qualifying aside. And actually, it's better to pick a side when you do your AP exam, because then your argument is more clear. Now, Beth, when it comes to providing commentary, what can we do to make it to get it from a 3 to a 4 by instead of just adding the word because and the verbs there? Anything else?
So something to know about the rubric in general, and this is going to apply to all 3 of the essays, but if you are trying to get your score from a 130 to a 140, so basically you're trying to get all your evidence and commentary points, it's important to remember to be consistent. We look for developed analysis and also even analysis. So you want to make sure that both or all 3, depending on how many body paragraphs you have, are well developed. So you really want to make sure, am I actually proving my thesis in my body paragraph? Like, have I fully proven my thesis? And if you do that with both paragraphs, it has the potential to elevate your score. So the consistency is going to be the key, I think, as well, because sometimes students have a paragraph that's pretty close, but maybe they have like a little hiccup or something in their line of reasoning. So maybe like there's a part that's just underdeveloped or not quite logical, and that can kind of affect the evidence and commentary.
Yeah. So when it comes to evidence for synthesis, just so people remember, you need to quote at least 3 sources at some point in your paper. You're just trying to make claims. Now, folks, there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions here about like, hey, do you have tips, like more tips for this? Folks, Beth Hall and I have tons of videos that walk you through each part of the essay. When we're done here, if you're really that worried, go to our channels and we will give you all of these tips. Someone did ask, so for the introduction paragraph, we just put the thesis sentence. No. I didn't say that you do that. I said that you have the option to do that. You do not need a full intro paragraph. Just your thesis can work. So the way that it would look on my student's paper is their first paragraph. They're going to indent. They're going to write their thesis. They're going to then drop down a line and indent and start writing body paragraph 1. My kids do not write full intro paragraphs that go through a web, a background, and a partition. Okay, that's just the moves of a normal intro paragraph. You might have heard it as the upside down triangle in your classroom or something like that. But my kids, 1 sentence for their intro. That's what I mean. But if you want to write an intro paragraph, you do you. Okay, you need to be comfortable for tomorrow. I'm just saying it's a time-saving measure that will not hurt you, that will also give you more time to just get right into the business, get that thesis point, and then just go start to work for that evidence and that commentary. All right, Beth, let's actually start shifting towards rhetorical analysis. One of the questions that I saw here is, what are the most common rhetorical choices? But really the students probably ask, what are the most common rhetorical devices, things like that. So Beth, let's talk about rhetorical analysis here.
Okay, I just saw a question in the chat. Someone said, will this be recorded? So yes, if someone has to leave and they wanted to know if they can come back. So just FYI, in case you're looking for more tips, we have done previous Q&As that are on Timm's channel, this one, Garden of English. And then I've also done several Q&As over on my channel, Coach Hall Writes, and I'll be going live after this, like later tonight, like after my kiddo's bedtime as well. And I'll be going live on TikTok. So just in case you're like, hey, they're not answering my question, please know that we have a bunch of videos about this and other opportunities for you to get help. So just in case someone wanted to watch the recording, yes, it'll be available later for sure. And we really appreciate y'all's support, by the way. So as far as rhetorical choices, the prompt is going to ask about rhetorical choices and then either the message, argument, or purpose. So when people ask us, what are the most common devices or choices that you need to know? It's important that you understand what a rhetorical choice is. I'll give you a list of some of the ones that I see most commonly in a second, and I have a video about this as well. But I think sometimes the fear is, what do I do if I don't recognize a rhetorical choice? And so here's the thing. A rhetorical choice is simply, what is the writer doing? And so if you know that they're acknowledging something, if you know that they're flattering their audience, if they are criticizing their audience, if they're trying to create a common enemy or rally their audience, you can say those things and those will count as a choice because it's telling us what the writer does. So you don't need to rely on some of these other things like repetition, comparison, contrast. If you read your passage tomorrow and you're like, I don't know what choice is here, ask yourself, what are they doing? And try to keep it chronological too. So look for shifts in the passage and try to ask yourself, okay, what are they doing in the beginning, the middle, and the end? And that's going to help. Now, as far as the most common rhetorical devices, these are the ones that I see most frequently. And this is not an inclusive list, but I would say repetition is pretty common. With that, it's important that you acknowledge what word or phrase they're repeating and why they're repeating it. Don't just say it's for emphasis. What are they trying to emphasize and why? So repetition is common. I would say comparison or contrast are pretty common. So you could say compares, contrasts, or juxtaposes. And again, you have to tell us what they're comparing or what they're contrasting and why. Another one that's kind of common is an anecdote, which is a short story. So instead of saying uses an anecdote, if you want to use a stronger verb, you could say recalls a time when or reminisces on, because they're telling a story. Sometimes examples are pretty common. Sometimes allusions are common, though they're sometimes a little bit harder to write about. There's word choice and tone in everything. So when all else fails, you want to be specifically looking for the words that they're using and why. And then lastly, we tend to see a lot of students write about the rhetorical appeals, logos, ethos, pathos, or pathos, however you want to say it. Tim and I both have kind of preached this in different ways over the years, but we prefer that you not jump straight into logos, ethos, pathos. We want you to recognize that choices create the appeal. So for instance, if you notice that something is logical, ask yourself, how do I know? Is it because they're providing facts or statistics? If so, focus on that. If it's an emotion, please tell us which emotion. Don't just say the writer appeals to emotion, because you haven't really told us anything if you tell us that. Lots of writers have appealed to emotion, but if they're appealing to fear or nostalgia, those are two totally different emotions. Where patriotism, that's another one all entirely as well. So make sure you're telling us which emotion, but how do you know they're appealing to emotion? Is it that they're giving very specific examples that are very sad and it's making you feel sadness? Is it that they're giving vivid descriptions in detail and that's resonating with the audience? So instead of doing one paragraph about logos, ethos, pathos, we want to focus more on the choices instead. The appeals are kind of like a side dish or something. Like, they're nice to talk about, but rarely are the appeals the main show, in my opinion.
Absolutely right. Now, I want to just point out for people that are asking about how do we remember devices and choices? Well, as Beth said, devices and choices are different. And a choice is something that someone does, and a device is something that someone uses. When I've been talking with a lot of classes. I've been zooming in with them this week and last week, and they were like, well, are there any things to fall back on? And Beth, yeah, I think you really nailed it, but I'm going to turn some of the things that you mentioned into verbs. Folks, at the end of the day, when you need to say the author is doing something, so you're reading and you're like, okay, here the author does this. The verbs that you can typically fall back on, which most readings have these moments, are compares, contrasts, repeats, lists, and what was the other one that I gave out earlier? Oh, and presents. You could fall back onto one of those 5 words. Okay. And presents is the one that you can fall back on the most, right? Oh, so-and-so presents an example here. So-and-so presents, unjustified laws here. So-and-so presents, men from history here. Anything like that. That is a rhetorical choice. So-and-so presents a dilemma here. Good. All right. And then you just say, why? All right. Now, people are asking, how many pieces of evidence do you actually need for each paragraph? And folks, the scoring rubric says that multiple choices are analyzed. Multiple just means more than one. So if you've got a paragraph about one choice and a paragraph about another choice, and it actually explains how does that choice convey the meaning to the audience and move the audience to do something, you're fine. You're fine. When somebody asks this right here, what question should I ask myself to see what significance of the audience is in the RA? Here, the questions that you want to ask yourself as you read a rhetorical analysis is, as you read, try to break it into 3 to 4 sections. And then for each section, ask yourself this question. What does this section reveal about the speaker or the speaker's message? And then you can ask yourself this question. What does this section do to make the audience feel about the speaker or the message? If you ask those 4 questions, you will be able to write this paper, no problem. Because in your topic sentence, you'll say the author presents this here to evoke this emotion from the audience, or this author presents this here to convey that, like, I'm going to use the Cesar Chavez example, and I'll use communal pronouns. I can say that throughout the piece, Cesar Chavez repeatedly presents or includes communal pronouns in order to, and I say, okay, well, what's he trying to do here? And what he's trying to do, he's trying to highlight that he's one of the poor and oppressed that he's trying to encourage. There we go. That's my topic sentence. So where do we see the communal pronouns? How does that communicate that he's one of them? And then why would people then actually trust him more? That's the body paragraph for that. Okay. Devin asked for a template for FRQ1. Devin, just go to the Garden of English or Coach Hall Writes and then just say synthesis help. And I promise you it'll be there. Actually, you know what, Beth? I'm going to share my screen just super quick because I want to show people about our playlists so that people can know exactly where to look and they can see what they will get. Okay. So I am going to go to screen 2 and I will pull up YouTube here. So we'll go to YouTube and we'll just go to Coach Hall Writes and we've got playlists. So folks, if you go to Coach Hall Writes on the playlist here, you're going to notice that we've got our collaboratives here. We've got our, kind of Cram elements. And if you just scroll down here, hey, look at your entire view full playlist for AP Lang question 2. And this will work through a lot of your questions that you all are asking tonight. Okay. Now, if I go to the Garden of English, I have playlist 2. So we'll go to my channel. We'll go to the Garden of English and then I'll go to playlists and you can just go through and you can just look and see, oh, hey, I'm looking for my argument. So if you go to view full playlist, right? We have, hey, how can I actually write arguments really well? And I put everything in order and I know that Coach Hall does too. So folks, please know that you can just go to these playlists when we can't get to all of your questions and we will work our best. Well, I should say we have all of this information out there for you already as well. Okay. Okay. Other questions about rhetorical analysis. When you're reading the rhetorical analysis at the reading, Beth, what's one of those things that you're like, oh, this happens all the time and I wish that kids, like, what's the tip that you have for kids where they mess something up every time and you're like, oh, I just wish that you had that?
So one of the things that I think is important to remember is if you look at the rubric, it basically says that you need to connect one choice to the message, argument, or purpose. And you'd be surprised, but a lot of people ignore that part of the prompt at times. So remember that a message is going to be like the lesson or the takeaway. And the purpose is going to be like why they're giving the speech or writing the letter. And the argument is if they're trying to be persuasive. And so basically, you want to make sure that you are explaining how that choice helps them convey their message, achieve their purpose, or develop their argument. And I feel like that sometimes gets lost. Something else that students sometimes forget to do is it does mention analyzing the significance of specific words and details. And so, yes, you do need to include textual evidence, but I kind of tell my students, hey, within the quote that you're choosing, look for specific words that you can kind of pull out and analyze. So you can say something like mentioning, we'll take the Abigail Adams prompt, like mentioning a river. And like, why did she use the word a river? She compares a traveler to a river. So why that particular comparison? And so looking at the specific words and details that the writer uses and including that in your analysis can help. And the important thing I would say is you want to try to have at least one paragraph that you're doing that very effectively, ideally two, but it just honestly takes one solid body paragraph to potentially elevate your score. So I hope that's encouraging to people. We're not looking for perfection.
No, we absolutely are not. We're actually looking to give you as many points as we can. That doesn't mean that we're willing to compromise and say, well, I really like how this kid sounds, so we're going to just bump it up a score. But we are trying to make sure that we award you for as much as we can. Now, I just put a playlist in the chat, folks. That is the rhetorical analysis playlist. That will teach you how to break down the prompts so you know exactly what you're looking for. It'll teach you how to identify the text that you want to use. It'll teach you how to label the choice of that text that you want to use. It'll teach you how to integrate your quotes into your topic sentences. It'll teach you how to write those topic sentences, and it will give you templates for commentary. Okay. Now, for my students, I typically tell them that the way that their commentary should work in rhetorical analysis is their first sentence of commentary should have the word because in it. The next sentence will say consequently since. And then the last sentence will always say, therefore, this would move the audience to blank, whatever that might be. And then it will say due to the fact that. Okay. And so if anybody's looking for examples of what that looks like, go to that playlist that I just put in there. And after our time tonight, you can go through those videos. And Beth and I have playlists for questions 1, questions 2, and questions 3. If you're looking for like, hey, how can I just learn this quick? Well, no, that's why we had a whole year of teaching AP. You had a whole year in AP Lang. But we can give you tips, and our videos are meant to be relatively shorter so that you can get those tips and you can see it. And we always provide examples. Someone asked how many body paragraphs should they write? Folks, for my students, all year, I promote a thesis, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Okay. But my students know that if they write a thesis, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion, they can still get full marks. And so they know going in, I'm going to strive to write a thesis and 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion. And if I write a thesis, 2 body paragraphs and a conclusion, I'll be okay. And the conclusion, I'll be okay. And one of them might not even get to the conclusion. That's okay. The minimum is thesis, 2 body paragraphs. But once again, don't go in thinking, how can I do the minimum to get the highest score? Go in thinking, how can I be the most thorough, but also manage my time? Okay. And then the person that just asked the question about, how can I start some of my sentences for analysis? I just put a playlist in the chat. And if you go to the topic sentence video, it'll tell you I give templates for topic sentences for rhetorical analysis that will prompt your analysis. All right. Beth, we already answered the conclusion question a bunch, so you might have to go back and replay this video. But let's actually move to argument. Let's talk about argument examples. What do we need to do for that? Oh, you know what? Actually, Beth, can I answer one more question about rhetorical analysis? Okay, so it just came in. How can you use syntax and as a rhetorical device? Honestly, I almost never encourage my kids to do that ever. The only time that you want to use something that's syntax based the only times are as follows. If you see parallel structure, the point of that is to emphasize something. It's a repeated sentence pattern. Don't call it syntax. You can actually say the author repeats these ideas multiple times. And then you say, in order to emphasize, and you say what's being emphasized. That's how you write about that. The only other sentence I tell my kids, the only other 2 types of sentences I tell my kids to write about are if you see a rhetorical question, you can write about that question because normally it's answered right after, which is called hypophora, but do not say hypophora. You could say the author asks a question and immediately answers it. The effect of that is always the same. It's brainwashing. Okay. Think about this. What do people actually use rhetorical analysis questions for? Well, they normally ask them and then they answer them right after. So it makes it seem like you thought about the answer to the question, but then because it was provided for you, you're actually more apt to hold on to their answer. And the reason why I know that that's true is because I just did that. I asked a rhetorical question and I answered it about its effect. And you all now believe that that's actually its effect. So there's your proof. The only other type of sentence that I let my kids talk about is a short declarative sentence. If it's really short, that's a big deal. That has the a pow of meaning there. So if they just say the person then includes a short sentence in the midst of everything else in order to emphasize blank, that short sentence in the midst of all these long sentences is also meant to emphasize. You just need to say what it is emphasizing. So that's how you would do it. All right. Sorry, Beth. Let's shift to argument.
All right. So I think one of the biggest questions I get about argument is, what do I do if I can't think of any evidence? So the argument question is question 3. Usually there's a quote and you have to really identify the topic. You have to know what you're being asked to write about, because a couple years ago, the prompt was essentially, what is the value of striving for perfection? But a lot of students just wrote about the value of perfection. Mm-hmm. And so it's important that you take the time to recognize, okay, what am I being asked to write about? Last year's prompt was also a little bit challenging because it was about timely decisions. And so students had to take a second to think, okay, what is he actually saying? Like, what does timely mean? And so it's really important that you make sure you understand the topic being asked before you start trying to generate your evidence. So I usually have my students wow, that was really country there. I usually have my students ask themselves, okay, what is the value of this topic? When is it helpful or harmful? Some kind of open-ended question like that before they start to come up with evidence. I like them to think about the broader reasons, because sometimes that really does help. And I give them an acronym, CHORES. Some of you might be familiar with ReHugo or CHELPS. I know Timm does S-cubed. They all really get you to the same place. But CHORES stands for current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experience, and science. And so those are different categories of evidence that you could potentially write about. You don't have to write about all of them, but basically you can use that as a way to plan your evidence. And I know it will be asked at some point. So yes, you can write about personal experience. I don't necessarily encourage you to make up personal experience, because a lot of times we can kind of tell and it's fake. But we can't fact check you on the exam. We're not able to just go Google it and say like, oh, okay, is this true what they said? We don't call your school. We don't say, oh, did this really happen to this person? No. So it has to be convincing. You want to choose the most convincing examples. And sometimes, honestly, the prompts do allow you to write about yourself. Like they kind of lend itself to personal experience. So choose realistic examples. I love to see examples from history, current events, things like that. Outside knowledge. Some of my students have written some wonderful essays about topics that might not actually seem super academic or sophisticated. But I had a student write, and she used Cheer, the Netflix documentary, and Dance Moms as her evidence. And it was one of my favorite essays all year. So basically lean into what you know well. Don't try to write what everybody else is writing. Write about the stuff that you know about, because those essays are honestly so much more fun for you to write. And they're more fun for us to read, in my opinion, too.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And, you know, I've read good essays with some ridiculous evidence in it. I actually read a good paper last year with My Little Pony as evidence. And I was just like, that's ridiculous. Now, folks, let me make this very clear. I'm not encouraging you to use non-academic evidence, and neither is Beth. That is not what we're doing. What we're trying to say is you have to at least try to provide us something. And the something might really be something that's non-academic, but that's more of an attempt than just putting nothing there because you're like, well, I'm going to just sound like an idiot if I use Elsa here. Like, I know that the prompt a few years ago about exploring the unknown, Finding Nemo and Elsa were used a lot. And is it the best evidence? No, it's not at all. But that doesn't mean that you can't actually argue about it well. Okay. Now, somebody's asking about personal pronouns again, and I know that you brought that up too, Beth. And so I'm dropping a video right now in the chat about personal pronouns. My friend Krista La Liberty brings you through on how to actually do that very, very well on your test day. Okay. Please also know that when it comes to argument evidence, you don't have to feel like you need to use literature. In fact, most of the time, literature is not used very well. Okay. Now, somebody asked if they could use evidence from the synthesis prompt for the argument essay. They almost never correlate. So forcing that is not a good idea. So I want to give you all a heads up on that. That's for sure. Yeah, Taylor Swift, Christopher, work as great evidence. In fact, the striving for perfection prompt would be a really good one to use, because if you ever watched her Netflix documentary, she talked about how she had ridiculous, body weight issues and whatnot, as she was striving to be like what perfect might actually be, but she was miserable. What a great pertinent example for something like that. Okay. And whatnot. And folks, listen, you're all, I'm seeing a lot of questions that are like, are we allowed to do this, this, and this? Folks, all things are lawful on your AP exam, but not all things are profitable. You are allowed to do whatever the heck you want. You can draw hand turkeys if you want to, right? Do I recommend it? No, I recommend that you go in with confidence, okay? But if you're going to say I, us, our, we, or something like that, like any of those personal pronouns that you're told to kind of avoid, you need to do it with a purpose. Say, when I say we, I am actually talking about my group of friends that I was talking about here, okay? Now, somebody asked if I think AI might be something that students could use as evidence. Folks, I think that within the next few years, we're going to see an AI prompt. I know that on my ultimate review packet, the prompts that we wrote actually consistently involved AI, because it's something that's there. When it comes to evidence, folks, as you're thinking about preparing for tomorrow, you want to kind of have evidence. You want to think about evidence that you might be able to use kind of holistically. I can tell you that a lot of times, and as Beth said, argument prompts relate very well to contemporary issues. I wouldn't be surprised if you would be able to use things about like First Republic Bank or Silicon Valley Bank, or interest rate hikes this year, or AI. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, Beth, you just brought up the idea of making up personal evidence for an argument. Yes, the short answer is yes, that's okay. I'm just answering it again because somebody asked again. But folks, this is on you. This is where I stand on this. This is not anything else. Beth was right. There's no AP police knocking on your door. But for me, I want to encourage you not to make up evidence, because I think that is damaging to your character and your integrity. If you are willing to lie for the sake of a score on your exam, I will never encourage that. Now, if you're okay with that, I am not you. So I just want to make sure that you recognize that. But for me, if kids are like, can I do this? I will tell kids you can, but if you're asking me for permission, you may not. And that's my students. And I tell them exactly why in relation to integrity, but that is on you if you're going to choose to do that. There's no minimum amount of sentences for conclusions. My kids can write really good conclusions in 2 sentences and in 6 sentences. All right. Beth, here's a good question. My teacher mentioned how using polarizing evidence could be a problem, like one with like evidence with different views, like political evidence and whatnot. Would that actually pose damage? Beth, you're first.
Okay, so here's the thing. Your AP reader is supposed to look at your essay in a non-biased way. They're not allowed to project their personal opinions or beliefs onto your essay. So I do encourage you, though, to make sure that what you're writing is factual and not just opinion. So you've got to be able to back it up, because a lot of times what happens is people start talking about somewhat controversial topics, religion, politics, things like that. And it gets to be more of an emotional argument rather than a logical one. So we want to make sure that whatever you're saying, you're backing up with concrete evidence. And I think if a reader were to have a difference of opinion, it shouldn't bias their work, but readers also have the ability to pass it off to somebody else. So I'd like to believe that as readers, we have the integrity that if there is something that ruffles our feathers in some way, we could pass it on to somebody else who could be objective. So I wouldn't worry about it too much, but I do think your teacher is right to caution you, because some topics can be somewhat inflammatory and you don't know who's going to be reading your paper. So just make sure that you're keeping it factual and logical and writing a strong argument. This is not some kind of opinion essay.
All right. That's great advice. And now I'm actually going to address that too. Folks, I read a lot of papers that I disagree with. A lot, okay, in terms of how students interpret the evidence, in terms of how students reason out their evidence. But if they are producing the argument that matches with the argument that I disagree with, and they're using evidence and I'm like, I don't really agree with that, but I can trace the line of reasoning, I will acquiesce, and every reader is told to do so. However, when it comes to my students, I tell them, I want you to pretend that every reader completely disagrees with you, so that when you provide your evidence and your reasoning, that you are so thorough that someone who disagrees with you will be like, all right, even though I disagree with you, I can totally understand where you're coming from. And if you can do that, then we're good. Now, people are asking, how much evidence do you need per body paragraph? Now, folks, with argument, I tell my students, you need to describe your evidence in a minimum of 3 sentences so that you can be very specific, and a maximum of 5 sentences so you're not only just summarizing your evidence here. But 3 makes it so that you're not just giving vague generalizations, you're really thinking specifically, but 5 limits you to actually not overdoing this description of your evidence. Somebody also asked, how do we keep our stamina after doing all this reading and writing? And I'm sorry if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Who was that? Someone said that. I missed it. I think it's Kareen. Kareen, you got to leave that energy on the dance floor. You don't keep up your stamina. You want to exhaust yourself to that last bell. And when you're done, you just, okay. And then you go take your nap or whatever you got to do. Okay. Leave the energy on the dance floor. And just keep going. You're right. It's kind of like, as Dory says, just keep swimming. When you feel like, oh, I've got no more stamina for this, I've got one more essay. Good. You do have stamina for that. You just keep swimming. Okay. All right, Beth, it looks we're going to be getting ready to go soon here. Anything that we can continue to add before we send people over to the after party at Marco?
So I saw this question a couple times, but it was basically like, not just stamina, but like, how do we manage the anxiety or the nerves and stuff for tomorrow?
Yeah. Oh,
And
I can't wait to answer that. This is a great way to end. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Beth, you first.
I want to like give y'all a little bit of like positivity and advice. Excuse me. So here's the thing. The test, we want as your teachers, we want it to feel easy because we want to know that you are applying the skills that we've taught you all year. But I want you to remember something. If it's hard, it's okay. Some of the greatest things in life don't come to us easily. They come to us as a challenge. And so if it is a challenging topic, whether it's a reading passage or an essay, if it's challenging for you, it's going to be challenging for other people in your testing room and for other students taking the test. So make sure that you don't give up. Like, please just write something. I tell my students, like, I want you to use all of your essay time. Like, one of my only pet peeves for AP Lang is if you're sitting there with 10 minutes left and you're not writing and you think you're done, that's one of the few times where I'm going to be a little frustrated because I want my students to use all their time. So give it your best shot because you don't know what score you're going to get. I've had students tell me, oh, I think I failed it. And then they come out with a qualifying score. So don't let the negativity cripple you tomorrow. Just keep doing what you've been taught to do all year. And please remember, for what it's worth, you are so much more than an exam score. Like, yes, the test is important. If you're having any kind of nerves or anxiety for tomorrow, then that means it's important to you. And that's a good thing. However, we want to make sure that we're channeling that energy in the right direction. I'm a second-degree black belt. I haven't trained in a long time, but my martial arts instructor used to tell us that you just gotta, he liked it when we had butterflies, but he said, get the butterflies all flying in the same direction. And I thought that was really helpful advice because, you know, it's okay to be nervous. We just want to make sure that we're using that energy in a positive way. So believe in yourselves tomorrow, do the very best you can, and just leave it all out there because you've only got a few hours. It'll be over. Your hand is going to hurt. Your brain is probably going to be a little foggy. Like, you know, you might get hungry toward the end or something, but like, it'll be over. So just do the best you can in the time that you have.
All right. Someone asked the question, what should I be aiming for to get an overall score over 3? You want a 130 on all your essays minimum, and you need to get 18 multiple choice questions correct out of 45. That will most likely get you a qualifying score of a 3. Okay. Now, hold on a second. I gotta deal with this. All right. So anyway, last couple things here about the anxiety. If you're nervous, that's good because that means you care. But I want you to think about tomorrow's exam as an opportunity, not just a test. You have been preparing for this. And this is just like any sport that you play or any drama production you're ever in. You go out there, you're nervous, but you can do it. Even if The practice up to that week has been a train wreck. When you're in tech week for drama, for some reason, the play consistently comes together. So it's really important that you recognize this is an opportunity for you to show off your skills. There's no like, I can do this, I can't do that. It is read the prompt and then write the essay that the prompt asks you to write. Beth and I have so many tips on our YouTube channels that you guys can consider going and watching after this. But folks, get some sleep. Get some sleep. Because honestly, if you don't have one clue about anything like for tomorrow up until now, then staying up all night isn't going to help. Okay. But Beth and I do have a lot of tips for you. We care about you a lot, which is incredibly interesting that we can say that because we don't know any of you, but we do. And that's why we give up the time that we do. Tom, I see that reference to the Flying Spaghetti Monster, by the way, and I hope that we have conversations at the reading this year about Flying Spaghetti Monsters. I'm totally down, just so you know. Okay. But anyway, please note, folks, that the exam's an opportunity. Beth is right. You are so much more than a number. You're a human being. This is a 3-hour period of your life. Go out there, own it, be okay with the fact that you have anxiety. I'm going to tell you why. Because it means that you are totally human. These are the moments in our lives where we get to experience all of what it means to be human and go out there and own it. Okay? Beth, anything else before we go?
Nope, just one final good luck, everybody. You've got this. Stay positive. And just a quick reminder, Marco Learning is doing their own segment tonight, so please support them. They have great tips as well. And then I know some of you still have questions, and I'm a bit of a night owl myself. I know we're telling you to sleep, but some of you are in different time zones than us. So I will be going live on my channel, Coach Hall Writes, later tonight on YouTube and TikTok. If you feel like you have more questions that you want answered, I would love it if you would head to my channel later. Once I put my kiddos to bed, I'll spend an hour or so answering more questions. But we so appreciate your support. We have plenty of videos if you do want to continue cramming and planning, but the most important thing is to just be ready tomorrow. Make sure you've got your number 2 pencils and your pens if you need them, maybe a snack, wear comfy clothes tomorrow, but you've done all you can do to prepare. So tomorrow's game day, so trust yourself, but y'all are ready and you've got this and we are rooting for you. We might be as nervous as you are.
Yeah, honestly. So we thank you all and we appreciate the support. I'm going to go watch my son's baseball game. Folks, if you have questions later on tonight, you reach out to Beth. You do not reach out to me, okay? Because I am sleeping and I'm going to go watch my son's baseball game. So you all have a great night. Beth, it's always a pleasure. And we'll talk soon, I'm sure of it.
All right, awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Go on your exam, folks.